Let's get started on Chapter 8, Network Operating System Fundamentals. This is a big chapter. In this chapter, we will look at operating systems and network operating systems. We will look at operating system components, the purpose of a network operating system, sharing and mapping, account management, authentication, authorization, group policy objects, local storage, centralized storage, SAN, storage area network, and cloud storage. We will look at DNS, the domain name service, at host name resolution, at fault tolerance, at virtualization, at operating system installation, and at operating system additions. So let's start out on page 332, Network Operating System Fundamentals. And as you know, computer software can be divided into two categories: operating systems and applications. And applications generally include things like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft Access. But we are here to talk about operating systems. And you will find that operating systems break down into two general categories: client operating systems and server operating systems. In a typical local area network, you have clients and servers. And the client operating system runs on the workstation. A client operating system such as Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, or Windows 8. And the server has an operating system as well. Sometimes they call it a server operating system, sometimes they call it an NOS, a network operating system. And an example of that would be, for example, Windows 2008 server or Windows 2012 server, which can function as a file server, print server, web server, application server, DHCP server, DNS server, or domain controller, all of which we will discuss in this class. Server operating systems and client operating systems. So let's now discuss, what does an operating system do, regardless of the type of operating system that it is. An operating system controls and coordinates the hardware, software, and data components of a computer. For example, one of the oldest operating systems was called DOS, which stands for Disk Operating System. And if you, the user, are going to save a file to the hard disk, you don't know where the free space is on the hard disk. You just click on File Save. And it's the job of the operating system to find free space on the hard disk and to save your file to that free space. Conversely, if you are going to retrieve a file from the hard disk, you don't know if it's on track 3, sector 4. You have no idea where it is. You just double click on the file, and it's the job of the operating system to locate the file on the disk, to pull it off of the disk and load it into the RAM of the computer. So the purpose of an operating system, whether client or server operating system, is to control the hardware, software, and data components of a computer. Let's now look at operating system components: the kernel, services, and the registry. Page 341 discusses the kernel, and the kernel is the most important part of the operating system. If we go to the Windows Explorer and go to the C drive, to the Windows folder, to the System32 folder, we will see there is a file called ntOSKernel.exe. NT operating system kernel.exe. That is the operating system file for the operating system. So whatever you do, don't delete that file, because if you do, the operating system won't work. ntOSKernel.exe is the kernel. It's the main file for the operating system. Another part of an operating system is services, page 340. A service is often called a program which has no interface. For example, the DHCP client service. It's running all the time, but the user doesn't even know it. When the user turns his or her computer on, the user doesn't know it, but the DHCP client service starts and it tries to grab an IP address from a DHCP server. Now, if the service is disabled, then any other services will fail to start. So if you can't hit the DHCP server, you might want to go to the DHCP client and just verify that that service is configured for automatic startup. If that service is disabled, then you won't be able to get an IP address from the DHCP server and you won't be able to get on the internet. The registry. Now, they mention that way up on page 607, but the registry is a fundamental part of the operating system. The registry contains all configuration files in an operating system. Whenever you make any changes to the operating system, you are modifying the registry. If we look at the registry editor, we can see that the registry editor contains the name of the computer, the domain that the computer is a member of, and the name of the DHCP server. If we were to change the name of the computer, or if we were to change the IP address of the computer, those changes would be stored here in the registry. The registry stores all configuration variables. Now let's go to page 345, Network Operating System Overview. As you know, a network operating system, a file server operating system, can act as a file server, but it can do other things as well. The network operating system can act as a print server, or a domain controller, or a web server, or an application server, or a DHCP server, or a DNS server. So you could say the purpose of an operating system is to act as a platform onto which you can install the file server, print server, domain controller, web server, application server, DHCP server, or DNS server. Let's now turn to page 352 and discuss file servers and file sharing. Specifically, what's meant by sharing and what is meant by mapping. Now, you know what a file server is. A file server is a computer with a big hard disk that everybody can save data to. And to share a folder means to make that folder available so users can connect to it. So if you have a folder called accounting and you want users to be able to access the files in that folder, you would then share that folder. To share means to make it available so users can connect to it. And then after the folder was shared, you would go to the workstation and you would map a network drive to share that folder so you could access the files in the folder. Mapping a network drive means making a connection from a workstation to a shared folder on the server and assigning that connection a drive letter. So let's share a folder. Let's go to Windows 2012 Server, go to the Windows Explorer, and under the C drive I have a folder called Accounting. There are files in that folder and I want users to be able to get to those files. So I right-click on the accounting folder and I select Properties, and then I click on the tab that says Sharing. Then I select the tab that says Advanced Sharing, and all I have to do is click off on this checkbox that says Share this folder. If I click on the checkbox that says Share this folder, that means users can now connect to the shared folder. After the folder has been shared, the next thing to do is to map a network drive from a workstation. So let's look to the bottom of page 353, how to map a network drive to a shared folder on the server. So I go to the workstation and I go to the Windows Explorer, and under the network icon, I right-click and I select Map Network Drive. I select Map Network Drive and I can type in the name of the server that I want to connect to. And if I can't remember the name of that server, I can click on Browse And I can see there is the server and there is the shared folder called accounting. So I will click on OK, and that will assign the drive letter Z to the accounting folder on server 1. I click on finish. Now you can see that the user's Z drive is mapped to the accounting folder on server 1. In other words, if the user saves to the C drive, he's saving to the hard disk on his own computer. But if he saves to the Z drive, he is actually saving to the accounting folder on server 1. To look at it another way, if the user saves to the C drive, then he is saving to his own local hard disk. But if the user saves to the Z drive, the user is actually saving to the accounting folder on the C drive on the file server. Sharing and mapping. Now let's turn to page 357 and discuss the role of an operating system. An operating system can function as a file server, but it can also perform the function of authorization and authentication. So let's turn to page 358 and discuss authentication and authorization. An operating system performs authentication, such as assigning permissions to files. In other words, not just everybody is able to access the payroll database, only certain employees. And the operating system controls authorization to access certain confidential files. And the operating system also performs authentication. And another word for authentication is user logon. To be authenticated means to be logged on. And to log on, a user must have a user account on the domain controller. A domain controller is another word for a login server. An Active Directory is the database of usernames and passwords. So when you perform account management as a network engineer, then you will be creating users in Active Directory, you will be deleting users, and you will be changing users' passwords. Let's go to a program called Active Directory Users and Computers, located on page 359. And if I hire a new employee, I would like to make a new user account. So I go into Active Directory Users and Computers in the Active Directory domain service. And if I right-click on Users and select New, I can create a new user. I will add the user's name, such as Bob White, and I'll give him a user login name, such as B. White, and then I will assign him a password. And now you can see I've just created the user Bob White. So theoretically, Bob White is a newly hired employee, and I've just made a user account for him, and now he can log on. Now, another part of user management is when users forget their passwords. So if a user forgets his password, you go to the user account, you right-click, and you select Reset Password, and you can assign a user a new password. And then when the user eventually leaves the company, then you would delete the user account, because if the person is not an employee, then they should not be able to log in to the company system. So user account management means creating users in Active Directory, deleting users, and changing users' passwords. The reason that a user has an account in Active Directory is so the user can be authenticated, so the user can get logged on. And we will go into user account management in greater detail in Chapter 9. And this concludes Part 1.